Are you looking for peace of mind at your doorstep? Look no further. With the Blink Video Doorbell, your home's entrance is always within your control. Check out the link in the video description to learn more and get your Blink Video Doorbell on Amazon. Your home is in your hands.
Donald Trump is attempting a feat that only one other president in history has done before: return to the White House after losing the presidential election 4 years earlier. The only president to date to leave office for a term and then stage a comeback was more than 100 years ago with the re-election of President Grover Cleveland. But the similarities between Trump and Cleveland's White House bids for a second term pretty much end there. The circumstances around Trump's campaign to return to office have almost nothing in common with what happened the last and only time a president pulled this off. Grover Cleveland was the 22nd and 24th President of the United States. First elected in 1884, he was the first Democrat to serve as president after the Civil War. But he lost the 1888 election to Benjamin Harrison. Then, 4 years later in 1892, Cleveland won the Democratic nomination again, and returned to the White House for a second term, serving from 1893 to 1897. Since then, several former presidents have tried to return to office, but none have been successful so far. Cleveland, when he left the White House, when he lost, was not spoiling for a comeback, said biographer Troy Senik, author of A Man of Iron: The Turbulent Life and Improbable Presidency of Grover Cleveland. For the first two and a half years, after he was out, nobody really thought he would come back. He didn't think he would come back, Senik said. Cleveland in fact actually felt pretty satisfied that he had one good term and the country had rendered its verdict, according to Senik. He was sort of a uniquely non-ambitious president. When Cleveland lost the 1888 election, it was a very close race, and Cleveland actually won the popular vote despite losing the Electoral College. At the time, there was some partisan fringe claims that the election was fraught, which were untrue but perhaps more plausible at that time than it is today. There is a real contrast in how these allegations were handled, because Cleveland was actually asked by the press at one point, "What do you think happened? Why do you think you lost?" And he said, "Because the other side got the most votes," Senik said. He was not willing to entertain any of those theories. It is not clear what Cleveland really thought, but what was most important to him, according to his biographer, was not unsettling the country with talk of a fraud election. What contrasts Trump and Cleveland as well is Cleveland was the end of the line for a certain type of Democrat, while Trump is driving a new Republican Party. What ended up drawing Cleveland back into politics was his view that the Democrat Party was moving in a more populist direction and away from Cleveland's view of a limited government. By being re-elected, Cleveland was able to hold off the shift for about 4 years. He's a real contrast to Trump, in that he's really a counter-revolutionary. He's trying to stop this populist surge in his party, whereas Trump is at the helm of his in the Republican Party. Cleveland was also concerned about the character of the people who could be the Democratic nominee if he isn't in 1892. The task of getting nominated in 1892 was completely different from the nomination process of 2024, being that it was well before party primaries. Cleveland's return was largely embraced by party elders, who were making the decisions on who the nominee would be and did not want to see the party heading in a populist direction, not the rank and file. He had a reputation for honesty and integrity, so the party was able to reconcile differences to nominate him. Had there been a primary process as it stands today with voters weighing in, Senik does not believe Cleveland would have been the nominee. When Cleveland lost in 1888, it arguably happened because he got ahead of the electorate. Specific to the time in history of this election, his re-election was built around the single issue of reducing tariffs, which divided his party. When he ran again in 1892 after Republican President Benjamin Harrison was in office and Republican-controlled Congress, tariffs had gone up and people were feeling the economic sting, so his stance benefited him in a way it had not in the previous election. Where Trump's attempt to mount a re-election bid and Cleveland's may have more in common is voters are perhaps fatigued in 2024 by a rematch between T.